Hello, listeners, and welcome to Cobbs Corner. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. In this episode, we will be doing a review of Thor the Dark World. This is the first that we have seen Thor since the ending of the Avengers. We saw Thor and Loki go back, presumably back to Asgard after the events with the Tesseract, after the events of the first Avengers film. So this film will follow the two of them as they come face to face with the Dark Elves, a threat thought neutralized 5,000 years ago. So we'll see the return of Dr. Eric Selvig, Jane Foster, her intern Darcy Lewis. So stay tuned. So, like the first Thor movie, the Thor the Dark World starts out in the past. It starts out about 2988 BC. It's about 5,000 years before the current point in the MCU timeline. And there's an event called the Convergence. And the Convergence is when the 9 realms of the cosmos, they all converge. And there's overlap, and there's a bunch of wormholes in the sky, and stuff will appear in one realm and disappear in one realm and show up in another realm. And so that's the Convergence. And then Thor's grandfather, King Bor, he, 5,000 years ago, stopped the Dark Elves, who were beings from a period long before mankind, when the universe was in a period of eternal darkness. During this convergence, they see it as an opportunity to put the universe back into a state of eternal darkness. But through King Bor and his Asgardian armies, they stop the advance of Malekith and take from them this weapon that they have, which is the ether, which would give them different abilities, give them the ability to pretty much make the world a period of eternal darkness. This weapon is hidden from them, and they are all but defeated, presumably. Cut to present day, if you remember where we last left off. Thor, at the end of the Avengers, we saw him along with Loki as a prisoner following the Battle of New York. The two of them, along with the Tesseract, went up to Asgard, and Loki is presented before Odin, king of Asgard, and basically Odin tells him, like, you will be in prison for the rest of your life. Loki said, I went down to Earth. It was my plan to rule the mortals as a benevolent god, and being a king is my birthright. And then Odin point blank tells him, your birthright was to die. Because if you remember from the first movie, find out that Loki is actually a frost giant, and he's the adopted son of Odin. So Odin pretty much says, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't be alive today. So sentences him to jail, and he stays in the Asgardian prison. And then meanwhile, Thor is cleaning up Loki's mess and just restoring peace and order to the 9 realms. We see him in, I think it's Vanaheim is the realm, and it's the home realm of one of the members of the Warriors 3, Hogun. And we see them fighting off marauders, and we see pretty much just Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, and then Thor shows up, and he's fighting off the invading army. And then they see a giant rock creature known as a Korgan, who we'll see Korgans later on in the MCU. And pretty much Korgan shows up, and the army is cheering him on. And then Thor, in one strike, knocks the Korgan's head off and says, "Anyone else?" And then they all surrender. And then Hogun is given a leave of absence from Asgard, said, stay here, be with your people. Thor returns to Asgard and finds out that Jane Foster searches for him. So when we last left Jane, he left Jane in New Mexico, and it's been about 2 years since then. Year and a half, maybe 2 years since the events in New Mexico from the first Thor movie. So now Thor goes back to Earth to find Jane Foster, as she has found a gravitational anomaly. Well, she's an astrophysicist. She finds in London, in like a staircase in some abandoned building somewhere, essentially a wormhole. It's like at the top of the staircase, you drop something, it disappears, and then it reappears above you, and then as it falls, disappears, and then reappears. It's a wormhole. And for the uninitiated, essentially, a wormhole is a theoretical jump point from one point of space to another. Theoretical teleportation. You'd appear in one area of space, then you disappear and appear in another area of space. Then you disappear from point B and then go back to point A. That's pretty much my physics crash course for the uninitiated. And so she is tracking these gravitational anomalies and then finds the ether, which was hidden, 5,000 years ago. The ether calls out to her. She finds it, and it kind of injects itself into her body. Now she's got the ether, and she thinks that she's only been gone a few minutes, but she's been gone 5 hours. So she comes back to the physical world, and her assistant, Darcy Lewis, played by Kat Dennings, calls the local London police, and it starts raining. Thor shows up. The police try to arrest her, but then one of the police officers, as he's arresting Jane, gets like blasted back 20 feet. So, Thor takes her up to Asgard, and they put her in this thing that they call a soul forge, which this is another example of how Asgardian magic is simply just science that we as humans don't understand. Going back to author of science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, who said magic is just science we don't understand yet. So we see Jane Foster explaining how Soul Forge is just a quantum field generator. It just harnesses energy from one being and like transports it to another, from one place and transports it to another. And so that parallel of magic just being science that we don't understand yet. And Odin tells Thor, get Jane out of here. Her Earth has healers. They're called doctors. But then Odin realizes that the ether is inside of Jane. And then he takes Thor and Jane into this room and explains to them how the 9 realms are not eternal. They have a dawn as well as a dusk. And how there are many relics of the universe. And while other relics took the form of stones, which we will get to later on, for those of you who have seen this movie before, the seasoned veterans of the MCU, you know what I'm getting at, and just hold your horses, okay? So the ether is pretty much formless, and it's a way to kind of warp reality. That's the power of the ether, to warp reality into whatever you would like. So Odin kind of explains the ether, and then we cut to, on Earth, Dr. Eric Selvig, who, if we remember from the Avengers, he had Loki in his mind. He said he's had a god in his head, and he's found naked at Stonehenge with these poles to detect gravitational anomalies. He's running around at Stonehenge, pretty much scaring everybody, and then he's arrested and apprehended. And then there's a scene where he's kind of explaining the crashing between realities, and he's got this chalkboard where you see Yggdrasil, and you see the 9 realms, and Schrodinger's cat, and all this real life multiverse theory that has been studied. And he uses the model a shoe. He uses one shoe, and then he takes another shoe and kind of crashing the 2 shoes together. He's this is the convergence. This is what's about to happen. And then cut to the people who he's telling this to, a bunch of old people. And then you get a Stan Lee cameo, him saying, "Can I have my shoe back?" So it's a fun little Stan Lee cameo. And then the Dark Elves, they attack Asgard. Malekith and the Dark Elves, they attack Asgard. And in one of the shots, you can actually see the line where Thor broke the Bifrost, and the Bifrost is repaired now, but you can see the place where the Bifrost was broken. So an attack ensues on Asgard, and meanwhile Loki's still in prison, and his mother, Frigga, she sends a projection of herself down to Loki's prison cell, and he pretty much says, Odin's not my father, and she's like, then am I not your mother? She tries to kind of calm him down, but Loki still wants to be the hero of his own story, and he realizes that it's a projection. It's not even the real her. Not even really her. And then they have to hide Jane Foster to keep her safe from the Dark Elves, and she's defended by Frigga, even as Malekith comes into the private chambers, and then Malekith kills Frigga, Thor's mother. Frigga, she dies, and from there, Thor is forced to team up with Loki to commit treason, essentially, to free Loki from Earth, because Loki knows that there's more than one way in and out of Asgard. So Loki, along with Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, they devise a plan, with the help of Heimdall, devise a plan to get off of Asgard, and seeing Loki released from prison and seeing him kind of be Loki for a minute and just turn himself into like these different characters, and like at one point he turns himself into Captain America, and which that shows up later in a future film. And as he encounters like each member of the Warriors 3, they say, if you even think about betraying Thor, and I'll kill you. And then he even like finds Volstagg. Volstagg says like, if you even think about betraying him, and Loki's like, you'll what? You'll kill me? Apparently there'll be a line. So one of the Dark Elves ships was left behind on Asgard after the attack, and then Thor, along with Jane and Loki, the three of them fly out on this ship that Thor doesn't really know how to operate. He's just like smashing all the buttons. He's like, and then Loki's like, don't smash them, press them gently. And then Thor's like, I'm pressing them gently and nothing is happening. And they end up flying and decapitating this one statue of King Bor. And Loki's like, congratulations, you just killed your grandfather. And in the comics, Thor does actually kill King Bor, his grandfather, in the comics at one point. That was a fun little nod to Marvel Comics. And so in the end, they escape to Svartalfheim, which is the realm of the Dark Elves. And from there, Loki displays a bunch of projections to make Malekith think that he has turned on Thor and that he's chopped Thor's hand off, which is Kevin Feige paying homage to, for the Star Wars fans, Empire Strikes Back being the second Star Wars movie to be made, and being that we're in phase 2 of the MCU. So each film in phase 2 will contain a hand being decapitated. If you remember, Darth Vader cuts off Luke's hand in Empire Strikes Back. So just a heads up for all the future films in phase 2. So Malekith thinks that Loki has turned on Thor, and then Loki drops the illusion. Thor picks up Mjolnir, and they fight back against Malekith and a few of his Dark Elves. I think Cursed is one of them. And Loki seemingly sacrifices himself to save Thor's life. And the ether is taken out of Jane Foster. The ether is taken out of Jane, and if the ether is removed from Jane, then the illusion is dropped, and Loki sacrifices himself to save Thor and Jane Foster. And the two of them, they go back down to Earth, and they free Eric Selvig from prison. And by using, I guess, Darcy's intern, whose name was Ian, kind of using him as sort of a, saying that Ian was Eric's son, even though he's not actually Eric's son, and they get him released from prison. The convergence happens. A bunch of birds fly up out of the ground, like they're from one realm, and then coming to Earth realm or Midgard. And Eric is like, Eric kind of smiles and says, it's always satisfying to find out that the world is crazier than you are. So yeah, Jane meets up with Darcy, Ian, and Dr. Selvig, and they talk about the convergence and how 5,000 years ago, all the ancient civilizations, the Chinese, the Mayans, and they witnessed the convergence, and they used all these cultural sites like Stonehenge and I think Machu Picchu, the Great Pyramid, and like Easter Island. And they draw up a map, and then he kind of circles those pinpoints on the map, and then like uses a ruler to pinpoint Greenwich as the center for where the convergence will be occurring. So they go to Greenwich, and they end up hammering into the ground these like probes, the gravitational anomaly detectors that we saw earlier, and pretty much the final battle starts. And I gotta tell you, this battle between it ends up being a battle just between Thor and Malekith, and we see the ship. We see Malekith's ship decloak, and comes into Greenwich and terrorizes a bunch of people at a university. And Thor, along with Jane and Darcy, are able to kind of fight off the Dark Elves with a little bit of I don't want to say techno wizardry, but they use these devices and these probes that they've had staked into the ground to create gravitational fields and take a bunch of these dark elves and teleport them to other realms or to like other areas of Greenwich. And Ian ends up saving Darcy's life, and Malekith and Thor just end up going from realm to realm, and we see two RAF, Royal Air Force pilots, show up to the battle, but then they end up getting teleported to Vanaheim and they end up firing a missile, but then it ends up going off way, way, way off target, and then into Vanaheim. At the end of the battle, once the battle's over, they make their way back to Greenwich, though. And as Thor and Malekith are just going from realm to realm, and you see Thor's hammer Mjolnir just flies all the way out to the sun and back, and you really have to check out that scene. Yes, it's definitely one of the not so much hilarious, but kind of all over the place final battles in the MCU. And Thor ends up using those probes to transport parts of like Malekith's arm to Svartalfheim, and I think both of his arms, and then and then flies and straps one of those probes onto Malekith, and then strikes him with the thunder, and then Malekith gets transported to Svartalfheim and then getting killed with his own ship. So hooray, the day is won. Thor goes back to Asgard. Thor goes back to Asgard, as he still, mourns the loss of his dead brother. He tells Odin that he tells Odin that he wants to continue to defend Asgard and the Nine Realms, but he cannot do that from the throne, and that he, basically saying to Odin, and this is probably going to come up again in the upcoming Thor: Love and Thunder, which, as of the recording of this episode, Thor: Love and Thunder has not come out yet. He essentially tells the Allfather that he is a warrior, that he cannot protect the Nine Realms from that throne, that he cannot be king. He offers to surrender Mjolnir to Odin. Odin says, "It's yours. Keep it. Go live your life." Thor says, "Thank you." He leaves. And then after he leaves, plot twist, that's not Odin on the throne. That's Loki posing as Odin. And Loki's still alive. And then, credits roll. And we get two post-credit scenes. One is a mid-credit scene. We see Volstagg and Lady Sif along with the Ether. We see them turn the Ether over to Tenelir Tavar, or the Collector, who we will see in Guardians of the Galaxy, which is 2 films from now. And they turn over the Ether to the Collector, and he asks them, "Why don't you keep the Ether safe in your own vault?" And they respond, "The Tesseract is already safe on Asgard. It'd be unwise to keep 2 Infinity Stones in one place." And this is the first time that we're hearing the word Infinity Stone. And in this scene, it's established that there are 6 Infinity Stones, and that, yes, the Tesseract was one of them. The Tesseract is an Infinity Stone. The Ether is an Infinity Stone. And we will see 4 more Infinity Stones throughout this Infinity Saga. By the end of the Infinity Saga, we will have been introduced to all 6 of these Infinity Stones. But this mid-credit scene shows a turning point for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then our second post-credit scene, our end credit scene, just kind of shows Thor going back down to Earth, and he goes back for Jane Foster, and that scene doesn't really go anywhere. And this just confirms that Thor will be available for Avengers 2, which we haven't watched yet. So that is the wind-up and the pitch. That is pretty much all that we got in 2013's Thor: The Dark World. So as I mentioned before, the mid-credit scene is really the biggest impact that this movie is having on the larger MCU. I think the year 2013, I'm not saying it was the worst year for the MCU, but it had 2 standalone films that were okay movies on their own, but didn't have the biggest impact on the MCU overall. I mean, in the end, with Thor: The Dark World, we got more character development for Thor and for Loki as well. We saw the convergence, although I kind of feel like Malekith was kind of overall one-dimensional, forgettable villain. And again, the secret hero of this movie is Loki. He was kind of the secret hero of the first Thor movie, and Thor the Dark World. He was also sort of the secret hero, and he's still alive, unbeknownst to Thor. So, this movie just really introduced us to the Ether, which is one of the Infinity Stones. Not going to say which one, and confirmed that the Tesseract is also one of the 6 Infinity Stones. Established that there are 6 Infinity Stones, and we're going to learn what these Infinity Stones are in a future film. We're going to be introduced to all 6 of them at some point. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about this film. I personally think it's kind of like a C, maybe even D tier film that didn't have the biggest impact on the MCU overall. It's not the most memorable film, but let me know in the comments wherever you're listening from. Let me know down below your thoughts on the film. Our next movie will be Captain America the Winter Soldier. We'll be going back to Earth, and this film will focus on Steve Rogers, Captain America, Steve Rogers, as he sort of has to catch up with the world, with the 21st century. The man out of time. We'll be introduced to Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson, the Falcon. We're going to see the return of Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. Nick Fury, played by none other than Samuel L. Jackson. And also the return of Bucky Barnes, played by Sebastian Stan. So that will be our next film. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Leave a like, share it. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Really helps the channel grow. Leave a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about this film. Follow me on Instagram at future_mechanical_engineer. Follow Cobbs Corner Podcast on Instagram at Cobbs_corner_podcast. Follow Cobbs Corner on Twitter at Cobbs_corner. And as always, I will talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.